My name is Elizabeth Scheckinger. I'm the Adult Services Librarian here at the library, and with me over here today is Lucy Struck, who is training to be the new Adult Services Librarian. Together, Lucy and I are pleased to introduce tonight's speaker, O.J. Fargo. Tonight, O.J. will be introducing us to the life as an Iowa soldier in the Civil War. This program has been funded by Humanities Iowa, a private nonprofit, and the State Historical Society. A cultural resource for Iowans since 1971, Humanities Iowa brings humanities programs to the heart of Iowa communities. The humanities are fields of study that help us to discover and remember who we are and how we came to be as individuals and as part of the world. Humanities Iowa offers funding for this Speakers Bureau event and for grants and support of public programs to nonprofit organizations across the state. If you have not already, please make sure you sign in for the event. On that same form, you can opt in to receive the monthly emails from Humanities Iowa about other events, such as this one, across the state, as well as its annual magazine. They are a great way to stay informed about Humanities Iowa events, again. And Humanities Iowa assures me that they respect your privacy regarding your contact information. Now, everyone, please help me in welcoming Mr. Thomas Goodfellow.
Just a little prequel before I jump in, because I'm going to be doing this in first person. So eventually it's going to be 1865, and I'm going to be 35 years old. So whichever one of the two of those give you the most trouble, you probably should start on that right now. Off to the left over here, somebody asked if they could touch that. That's the reason I bring them along. Everything's made out of iron and steel and you name it. So yeah, by all means, go ahead and go do that. Over here are all the books that she was alluding to that I've written. When I bring them, nobody wants them. When I don't bring them, everybody wants them. So you have a good time with any of that stuff. You know where the restrooms and that sort of thing is. I'm going to be doing a first person. While I'm going, okay, I would have just stopped here on my way back home after being gone for the better part of 4 years. So when I just happened to cross you people, they promised me they were going to feed me. And apparently they're not going to, so I'm here under false pretenses. At any rate, if you've got questions as you go along, by all means, go ahead and ask them. And if I end up in a tangent, oh well, that's the way life is. Otherwise, I'm just going to kind of plow along. It's going to be 1865, and like I say, I've been gone for about 4 years. And I'll fill in some of those details as we go. Is there any questions? Usually she tells me yes or no. Is there any questions before while it's still the 2023? Because I won't know anything about planes, trains, automobiles, your Uncle Charlie having served in whatever regiment, you know. So if you've got anything that's pressing, 3, 2, 1. Okay, it's now going to be 1865. All right. And I'm going to swing it. My name is Thomas Goodfellow. I'm 35 years old. I enlisted when I was 31 in Afton, Iowa. And I started off, I was born and raised in Rock Island, Illinois. And that Greeley fellow said I should go west and make my fortune. Well, he lied like a rug. I didn't make any fortune going west. I ended up in Afton, Iowa. And for the most part, I did whatever I could do. I brought along my wife and 2 kids. That was in 1859. Afton was pretty young at that time. So I taught school in the wintertime when all the big boys came in off the farm, so they needed somebody with some muscle. And the rest of the time I would tend shop or whatever it is they had me do. There's nothing west of here, so this is about as far west as they go. So I'm still looking to make my fortune. So when the war starts, the two sides had been after each other for as far back as I can remember. After a while, we all started believing our own propaganda, I think. Did any of you guys get cross-wired when you were in school? Yeah, I'm seeing him smiling back in the back. You know you're a troublemaker. All right. So when that happens, you get cross-wired with somebody, what's the first thing you're going to do? You're going to talk bad about them, right? Okay. You are out there, aren't you? I think okay. Every once in a while somebody says, well, I just walk up and smack them in the mouth. You go, oh, come on. Okay. No. You start to build yourself up. You start to knock them down. You tell all your friends how what a terrible person they are and what a swell fellow you are, and how given a third of a chance, you're going to just beat the bejeebers out of them right there in front of God and everybody. Well, it never dawns on anybody. You're actually going to meet them in the middle of somewhere. And your nose is going to end up over where your ear used to be. Well, that's the same thing that had been going on for 50 years or more. But every time somebody would get really cross-wired, like a Henry Clay would come up, or a John Calhoun would come up, and they're going to go, all right, let's compromise on this. All right. In the North, we thought they were all a bunch of whiny people. All right. They had slaves, they were godless. Every time something didn't go their way, we're leaving, and we thought, what a bunch of crybabies. They, on the other hand, thought we were kind of sissies. We're all shopkeepers. All right, so they were the big, strong, hardy fellows. So we had been at each other for a long, long time. Now, individually, no, but you read stuff in the papers and, your friends talk to you and that sort of thing. So nobody figures every time something looked like it was going to happen. I mean, clear back when Andrew Johnson was around, or Jackson rather, was around. South Carolina threatened to secede. He said, you try that, and we'll just see how that works out. Well, they changed their mind. Well, finally the compromisers quit compromising. They all died off or just got tired of doing it. So the firebrands now, they'd worked themselves up into a frenzy. You call them fire eaters. They're fire eaters, okay, no matter which side you were on. They were just going to breathe fire on you. Fort Sumter comes along. And everybody says, they'll back off that because there's been no shots fired and that sort of thing. Well, surprise, surprise, it didn't happen. So Lincoln says, look, I need 100,000 men and we're going to take care of this. Because there were only 15,000 guys in the Army when that war starts. They didn't want a standing army. They didn't want any part of a standing army. If you've got a standing army in Europe, sooner or later, one of them's going to try to overthrow you. And that's the last thing they wanted was a counter-revolution. Okay? So 100,000 guys for 3 months, because it's only going to last 3 months. No matter which side you're going to talk to. Okay? In our perspective, we're going to go down, we're going to show them some muscle, they're going to go, well, let's think about this. They, on the other hand, figure just exactly the same thing. We're all kind of limp-wristed guys. It's not going to happen. Well, Fort Sumter does happen. So Lincoln says, I need 100,000 men. Iowa is like the end of the earth. So 15,000 guys all jump up. There were only 600 and some thousand in Iowa at the time. But everybody's been waiting for this. And they're going to go down and punch somebody in the mouth in Missouri. They're going to come back, they're going to be a big hero. All right, so everybody wants to go. It's been 20 years since the last war. So they've really forgotten about how nasty that can be. And that was the Mexican War, which didn't bloody a lot of noses. So everybody jumps up. Lincoln says, no, look, I'm only going to pay you for 3 months and I only want 1,000 guys from Iowa. I got to get votes from all these eastern states, okay? Not a whole lot of votes out here. So I need 1,000 of you, that's it. Well, the governor is also a politician, Governor Kirkwood. So he takes 100 guys from Keokuk, 100 guys from Dubuque, 100 guys from Muscatine, 100 guys from Davenport. Everybody was going to vote for him, basically. And that's what is going to happen. That was the first Iowa. And they figured there wouldn't be a second Iowa because they wouldn't need them. So, of course, nobody has a clue. You were supposed to have militias. And the South did a much better job of that. There were a number of, half a dozen or a dozen militias throughout Iowa. But for the most part, they just like to dress up fancy and impress the women on Sundays. Okay. So once a month, they'd get these fancy outfits on. And they'd march around and so on and so forth, and they'd all have like some sort of a social. And it was just a grand old time. They'd thump their chest and oh boy, you know. But they hadn't done any target practice or any of that kind of stuff. Because Iowa was right on the way to Kansas. And Kansas had been being nasty for a number of years. But most of the governors who had been during that time span had let it be known that they were pretty much in sympathy for the anti-slavery people. So, like for instance, when John Brown comes through, they just let it be known that the keys to the arsenal are right on that desk drawer, and if they need a couple of guns to take with them, they could do that. So there's not a whole lot left when this actually hits. They claim that, well, they called them pumpkin slingers, because what they had left was like 72 caliber guns, mule kickers. They'd kick your shoulder off. Okay, some of them they said could fire around corners because the barrels were bent and that sort of thing. So you brought whatever you brought from home, all right, and did the best you can, because it's only going to last how long?
3 months.
3 months. I mean, you know, what could happen? So they all meet up, but there's no uniforms either. There's a depression going on. So nobody's got any money. The governor has to take out an $80,000 loan for the state, because the state's broke, just to get uniforms. So, but the ladies from Keokuk say, look, if you get us the material, we will sew the uniforms for you. So they do. The governor goes to Chicago, and he brings back enough material. Only he brings back, as I'm reading in the newspaper, bolts upon bolts of something called pink satinette. And I'm reading this and I'm going, they're marching off with pink uniforms. Well, pink satinette is gray with a tinge of pink. Yeah, no. That isn't what you were thinking at all now. All right, it was gray. Because if I was going to wear something around the house, it would probably be gray. Because that was the easiest kind of stuff to dye and that sort of thing, and that's pretty much what everybody wore. So they do sew these 1,000 uniforms. And they drill and they march and they do all sorts of things. They finally end up down in Missouri, haven't seen much of a rebel at all the whole time they were down there. So their 3-month hitch is up. Now by that time, they've met their colonel. 1,000 men in a regiment, commanded by a colonel. And as they're about 4 miles from Springfield, Missouri, there's an enemy out there, a place called Wilson's Creek. And their enlistment's up, but they said, we're not going home. We're not going to tell our grandkids that we spent 3 months roaming around Missouri and then came home while this battle. So they do go into battle. Now everybody in the east had a pretty steady stream of losses, Bull Run and a variety of other places. They're outnumbered 3 to 1. But they figure they're going to take them by surprise. So they do take them by surprise, but they are outnumbered 3 to 1. So they do end up getting whooped. But they're big heroes because they've done their fair amount of damage and actually came close to winning, which is better than the boys in the east had done. So they all come home. Well, by that time, Lincoln and everybody else figures out, because Bull Run has been there, now they know this is not going to be a 3-month affair. Most of the country is still enlisting people for 6 months or a year. In Iowa, they said, 3-year hitches, that's what we're going to do. Because it's going to take us 6 months to get you to the point where you're even close to being a soldier. Because we didn't know anything. There's no militia activity. So that by now they're ready to pick up guys like me. Because now Lincoln wants 300,000 more. So now they're ready to go out in the hinterland out here. So I became part of the 4th Iowa, which actually was in Canesville. You guys, I think, call it Council Bluffs now, but it was Canesville then. We were one of 10 companies of 100 men. Took 8 counties. It was pretty sparse out there. Took 8 counties to make that regiment. So just one day, recruiter shows up and he says, look, I need some recruits. So everybody's excited about this. This is in Afton, Iowa, you understand, not a lot of excitement going on there. But the day comes. So that whole afternoon, the local band has been on their bandwagon and they've been cruising around town. So if you thought this was a good idea, you jumped on that bandwagon so everybody knew that you were in favor of this whole thing. And that night there's going to be a recruiting rally. So the mayor talks and somebody from, ex-soldier from the Mexican War speaks and the ladies auxiliary speak. Finally somebody says, look, anybody who wants to enlist, rush to the front. So everybody knows who's going to and who isn't, because they don't want to miss this chance. And it's only going to last how long? 3 months. So if you don't get in on it right now, you're up a creek. You know, you're going to have to say, well, I don't know, I got the back of the line, didn't quite make it. So everybody runs to the front, including a number of the ladies. Well, you shoo them back, because everybody knows women don't go into the Army. In fact, one of these days they're going to want to vote too. Can you imagine that? Someday they're going to want to wear pants. And good God. Anyway, just kind of send chills up. Well, although, you know, people talk about that, but everybody knows the man is the head of the family, right? But the woman is the neck. So what makes the head go back and forth? The neck. All right, so yeah, you've got all the privileges and none of the problems. There aren't any Carrie Nation types in this. Yeah, maybe. I'm getting a few stares. Yeah, all right. Anyway, so everybody runs to the front. Who's going to sign the roster? You sign the roster. They can only handle 100 guys. So luckily, Afton doesn't have many more than 100 guys who are willing to go. But they have a variety of reasons for wanting to do that. In some cases, they're just irritated that they've been at this for so long, they just want to go punch somebody in the mouth. Sometimes, for the most part, they're irritated that the South would jump ship. In some cases, yeah, slavery had something to do with it. And then there's guys like me who haven't seen $13 in cash money for quite a while. And they're going to give me a suit of clothes, and they're going to feed me, and I'm going to go on a little junket down into Missouri. And like I say, I'm going to make $13 a month. I'm going to come back and I'm going to be a big hero. Sure beats what I was doing before. So you say to the family, okay, I'm going to enlist too. They go, okay. Now maybe they just wanted to get rid of me, I don't know. But nobody figured it was going to last a whole lot longer than, no way in God's green earth it was I going to be gone 3 years. Well, it didn't quite work out that way. But they give us 2 weeks, and then they say you get your affairs in order and you come back in 2 weeks. So you come back with whatever you get dressed in. Usually some sort of civilian clothes because we have no uniforms. Basically, about that stage of the game, whatever New York didn't want, Pennsylvania got. Whatever Pennsylvania didn't want, Ohio got. Whatever Ohio didn't want, Indiana got. Whatever Indiana didn't want, Illinois got. Whatever was left, we got, which was 0. Okay, so we don't actually see a uniform of any kind until we get clear down into Missouri. And I'll go through some of that. When we do get down there, they dress us in black. Now, I don't know whose idea was to dress us in black wool to go into Missouri in August. But that's just the way it was. You know, you don't question these things. So while we're in camp, one of the first things we do is elect our own officers. The colonel and lieutenant colonel and the major are appointed by the governor. So they're probably some big buddies of his, we don't know. Luckily, we were fortunate. The colonel we got, his name was Dodge. He's the guy now that they're talking about building that railroad out to the west. He doesn't last long because he's actually pretty good. But you're electing your own officers from there on down. So the only criteria is somehow they're status-wise higher than you are, and maybe they bought you beer the night before. But you elect your own officers, and then they pick the sergeants and the corporals. Now, keep in mind, none of us have ever been in the military before. So if you ended up being an officer, you're going to spend a lot of time reading translated French military books on how to do things. Because what you're used to is going, hey, you guys all come with me. Well, now there's 100 of you, and it doesn't work that way. Sooner or later, we're going to meet up with the other 9 companies. There are going to be 1,000 of us. All right? You just don't holler, hey, come here. So one of the first things they have us do is learn 25 or 27 bugle calls and 25 drum calls. So when you hear that, that means you're supposed to be wherever your sergeant is at. And you better get there pretty quick. All right, so everything is done by drum and bugle. All right, so we go, yeah, all right, that's okay. Well, then you have to learn how to, like march, you have to get someplace. You can't just all run in a big herd. You know, it doesn't work that way. So we have to learn how to do basic maneuvers using the drum and the bugle, and in some cases actually verbal commands. Most of these guys are farm boys. They don't know from right and left. They know north, east, south, and west. But they do understand the difference between hay and straw. So you put a sprig of straw in one boot, sprig of hay in the other one, and that's how you get them going down the line. Hay foot, straw foot, hay foot. Even the guys in the back row figure out after a while, hay foot is your left. All right, then you can actually start calling it the left. All right? So we do that, and of course the whole town is turned out. So no matter what you do, you know, boy, you're just somebody now. And you're wearing whatever you brought from home. The boys from Winterset, the hottest number in the world was an outfit called Zouaves. And they fought for France in Algeria. And they were nasty people, apparently. But they dressed kind of in your face. Red pantaloons, you know, like baggy pants, white spats up to here, an outer vest, looks like it's got a cobra on the outside, inner vest, looks like it's got a cobra on the inside, and a fez, you know, like a Shriner would wear. Some of the boys, well, the whole company showed up like that. Well, the first chance they got, the officers went, get rid of that stuff. Let's get some real uniforms here. So, equipment is hard to come by. We don't see our first rifles until after we get to St. Louis. But anyway, we learn how to march, we learn how to do all sorts of things, which we think is a complete waste of time, because we're just going to go down and bust somebody in the mouth and come back home, right? All right. So, all right, but for 13 bucks a month, I'll put up with that, I guess. It pays. It pays better in cash money than I'd seen in quite a while. So, from there, we're up here. Can you see that in the back?
Yeah.
Okay. Otherwise, I can move it up a little bit if you want. You're all right? Okay. We're up here. So we go across country, and we end up in Canesville, which is right about here. En route, we find out that there's guerrillas going on down in through here. So they send us down into Missouri in kind of a detour. Well, there was more of us than them, so by the time we get there, they were long gone. I think they ended up burning St. Joe in the process. But so we now meet up with the other 9 companies. So now there's 1,000 of us. We meet our colonel for the first time. We drill up there for a while. They take us on a steamboat down to St. Louis. There we meet up with our brigade. Brigade now is 3,000 men. So you've got a company of 100, you've got a regiment of 1,000, you've got a brigade of 3,000, you've got a division of 9,000, you've got a corps, it keeps multiplying by 3. You got a corps of 12,000, you got an army of about 25,000. Okay? Now we're starting to figure out why we need this drum thing. There's a little friction, and always has been. The same guy who's now barking orders at you was just like you were like 4 or 5 weeks ago. So this doesn't set real well with a number of people. So there's, I wouldn't say any, not mutinies, but there's kind of a lot of mumbling and grumbling at times. From St. Louis, they send us down across Missouri, because it turns out we're chasing a guy by the name of Price. And Price was a former governor of Missouri, only he was pro-South. And he always had this idea. He bedeviled us for 4 years. This guy was always convinced that if he could get back into Missouri, every Missourian in the world would all of a sudden turn Confederate, and he was going to take the state back over. We follow him clear down here. That battle I mentioned, Springfield, was right about there. We meet up at a place down here called Elkhorn Tavern. We called it Pea Ridge, they called it Elkhorn Tavern. There we meet up with the Confederate Army, whose idea is to take over this state. They whoop us real good the first day. As it turns out, they end up coming from the north, and we have to turn around and meet them coming from the south. First day, they chase us pretty good. Second day, at the end of the first day, we killed 2 of their generals. That pretty much threw them into a tizzy. They had Indians with them. And they were scalping when we were down there. Anyway, we beat them. Had we not beat them, at that point, Missouri could have gone to the Confederacy. Lincoln was always worried about Missouri, Kentucky, Delaware, Maryland, all of which wanted to be neutral, but it didn't work. So he did a lot of things to keep them in the Union. Like, for instance, right now, you can still hold slaves down in Missouri. Okay? No place else in the country, but down there you can. From Pea Ridge, they took us across to a place called Helena. And there we fought some battles. The idea was they wanted to take over the whole Mississippi River. So other Iowa units were all up in through here. So we met them about like so. The idea was you were going to take Vicksburg. Well, Vicksburg was real difficult. Swamps all the way around it for miles and miles and miles. Trying to get down the river, they were up in a big bluff. That wasn't going to happen. I mean, we tried digging rivers, quite literally rivers, to get down there. Finally, they took out our supply depot up here, and Grant had to give it up. Grant was our commander at that time. But he didn't stop, so we spent the rest of that year over here. Generally, we didn't do a whole lot of fighting between November and generally April, March or April. It all depends when the roads cleared up. There was fighting, but not a lot of big stuff about that time. Okay, so now we're in 1863. Well, he finally figures out that if we come around this way and come in the back door, that we got a chance of taking Vicksburg, because that was the big deal. They wanted the Mississippi River. They wanted to cut them in half. So we sieged them there for about 3. We tried frontal assaults. That doesn't work. There's all sorts of battles around there. Black River, Jackson, a lot of stuff. We finally pull them up in Vicksburg. 4 months later, they finally surrender because they're eating rats, dogs, anything that they can find. From there, we go up to northern Mississippi. And I thought, wow, that's not a bad place to stay. And you're just fighting pockets of people. But one of our armies gets trapped in Chattanooga, the Army of the Cumberland. So everybody and their dog gets the call to show up down here to break that siege. Chattanooga sits in a big bowl. So they had them trapped down in the middle of that bowl, and they're just shooting off the top of all these hills. Well, we break that siege fairly easily. Lookout Mountain, have you heard of that? They told us it's straight up and down. And they said, you got to go up that mountain and take those guys off the top. You know, and you're looking at that and you're going, wow, good luck on that. Well, as it turns out, it actually was a lot easier than what we thought it was going to be, because they were so high up and that mountain's so steep, they couldn't shoot down. So once we slogged up that mountain, there was nobody left. They couldn't shoot at us. The next day, they're right across from Lookout Mountain. There's a big ridge, and they wanted us to take the bottom part of that ridge. Well, we just kept on going. So the generals, they tell me afterwards, are going, what's going on there? Are they crazy? Well, no. So we cleaned out that whole thing. So we thought, okay, Chattanooga's not a bad place to spend the war. It's fairly warm. Well, no. Whoops. Let's try up here. That's Chattanooga. This is Mississippi. Well, Uncle Billy, by that time Grant had gone east. He was too good for us. And all the boys in the East had a terrible time trying to win anything, so they sent him over there. And General Sherman, Uncle Billy, is now our commander. So he decides that we are going to go south into Georgia, and we're going to take Atlanta. So we fight a series of battles almost every day, because you're pushing this army ahead of you. We outnumbered them about 2 to 1. So they'd make a stand, we'd kind of go around them, they'd pull back, they'd make a stand, we'd pull around them. The real heavy fighting was around Atlanta. All right, so we fight a whole series of battles, Adairsville, Reseca, Dalton. I mean, it was like every day. But, see, I'd get stuff back from home. You know, my mother would read Harper's, you know, or Leslie's. Do you read Harper's or Leslie's? You don't read? He's ignoring me. Can you believe that? I can believe that. I knew it when he walked in. Anyway, at any rate, she's writing me, and she can't figure out why I'm not dead. She says, you know, she's getting all these reports. Well, I said, Ma, you don't fight every day. Okay, there's this, you know, we've got 60,000 guys. You don't all do it at the same time. You've got X number of people, and you rotate in. Oh, okay, she understood that. We finally ended up taking Atlanta. And I thought, well, Atlanta's not a bad place to be, except the place was in flames between us burning it and them burning it. All right, well, no. Uncle Billy decides that, I don't know if it was on his own or whatever, but he decides we're going to cut right across Georgia. And I guess we ended up in Savannah, so I don't know if that's where he wanted to go or not, but that's where we ended up. We didn't see a whole lot of problems down in here, because everybody, all the Johnnies, had ended up over in this area over here. So all we basically encountered down there was like local militia, kids and old people and that sort of stuff. When we were down there, we got south of Atlanta, about in through here, because the armies came down in 3 columns. So you just swept the place is what it amounts to. We were there one night, and all of a sudden this body comes dashing into the fire. There's 6, 7 of us sitting around this fireplace. Well, you're startled, you jump up. They had been moving prisoners from Andersonville over into the Carolinas. So this guy had gotten away, because they're only guarding him with local people. So they weren't nearly as good as the regulars. Well, this guy, if he weighed 90 pounds, I'd be surprised. All right, after that, if they said burn someplace, you burned it. Because if they weren't there, they must be on the wrong side of things. So the only people we encountered were what we considered like at least non-combatants or non-Johnnies, that sort of thing. Anyway, we end up in Savannah. From Savannah, we go up to the Carolinas. Well, they didn't defend it much because this is all swamp down in here. So they figured we can't get through. Well, our engineers were just great. They could build whatever you wanted. So we kind of took them by surprise. When we got to Charleston, of course, that's where the whole thing started. It all depends who's telling the story, but Charleston got burnt to the ground too. Now, I swear up and down it's them, and they swear up and down it was us, but it didn't break my heart one way or another. You kind of get what you reap, what you sow, if you ask me. We chase them up in through Carolina. Now, this is the Army of the Tennessee. This is the same army that we saw up in here. Only now they're only about half that size. So we finally end up, to make a long story short, we end up in North Carolina. When we get right about here, we get the news the war is over. What do you mean the war is over? Oh, Lee's beat. Well, who are those other 30,000 guys sitting across the other side of that river aiming at me if the war is over? Well, the war might have been over for somebody, but it wasn't over for us. It took us another 4 or 5 weeks to finally whoop on them. A place called Bentonville is where we finally beat them. The war ends for the most part there, because now Lee's beat up here, and the Army of the Tennessee is beat down here. You've still got 3, 4 armies roaming around, small armies, roaming all in through here, but they were really of no big consequence. They wouldn't have lasted long if they would have tried to fight. I got to give it to Lee. Now, he's no big friend of mine, but Jefferson Davis and some of the other generals, they wanted to continue the war. So they're telling these guys to go into the woods, fight a guerrilla war. Well, if they would have done that, shoot, I don't know when I would have got home. But, yeah, so Lee said no. You know, it's over, it's done. We fought the good fight, we did the best we could, go home. Because it didn't do you any good. That would have been nasty if that would have been a guerrilla war. Nasty, nasty, nasty. Because there was a lot of people, you asked the 3-4 Union regiments, Iowa regiments, the state of Missouri, they fought guerrillas the whole war. Now for them it wasn't terrible, but it was just, you never knew when somebody was going to shoot you in the back. If there would have been 25,000 guys roaming around in through here, it would have been a problem. From there, they take us up to Washington, D.C., and they're going to have this big parade. Well, we're Western troops, so there's 2 days. Nothing but wall-to-wall soldiers coming back. So guess which day we get? The second day. Because we're all rubes out here, I guess. We pointed out to them that, yeah, you guys got all the headlines. Does anybody know how far it is from Washington, D.C. to Richmond, Virginia?
No.
Not very far.
Not very far.
Not very far. I'll take that as an
50
answer.
miles? 40?
90.
Is it? No.
That's what you said, wasn't it?
Well, I said 50.
Yeah, okay, 90.
Yeah, I was 90.
Okay, 90. It's 90 miles, okay? It took the Army of the Potomac 90 miles to go from Washington, D.C. to right about here, Appomattox Courthouse. Okay, in the meantime, all us poor old, well, I used a different term, rural people, take out Missouri, Arkansas, parts of Louisiana, a little bit of Texas, better part of Mississippi, better part of Alabama, Tennessee, Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina, and we meet them on the other side. Okay? Who do you think won that war?
The boys in Baton Rouge say the Iowans are the ones that are fight.
I'm sorry?
The boys in Baton Rouge said that the Iowans are the ones that know how to fight.
Yeah.
They're the ones that know how to fight in the Civil War, so the rest of them are a bunch of shit. So you Iowa boys are tough devils.
We were,
End of story. Baton
did
Rouge.
you all hear that? That is a vote of confidence from the man in the front row.
Texan, yes.
All right. Yeah, Iowans, I don't know. Either we weren't terribly bright or we followed orders well or something. There was a place over here in Chickasaw Bluffs. Where are we at? It was over in through here. It was in that first campaign for Vicksburg. And they're all dug in on this hillside. Big old, kind of a semi-mountain. And it was somebody's idea that we were supposed to charge that mountain. Well, 4th Iowa was one of the few regiments that actually did it. Everybody else went, that's the stupidest thing I've ever seen in my life. And didn't do it. And that happens. You know, somebody goes, that doesn't make any sense. Because some of that stuff they had us do didn't make any sense. A frontal charge is not a good plan. Okay, it's not a good plan. But at any rate, Grant gets all upset, because that's when he was still our commander. He gets all upset. Well, Sherman, Uncle Billy, has to explain to him, look, these are one of the 2 regiments that actually went up that hill. So we got to put 1st at Chickasaw Bluffs on our flag, and that was a big deal, because there's only just a certain amount of regiments that are, at any given time, get to put that on there. And you don't get to put it in if you're fist fighting somebody in the backyard either. At any rate, so they said we looked like wolves, lean wolves, marching down there, which we thought was all right. We didn't have any time to shine our buttons and all this kind of stuff. We've been too busy slogging through there. We walked, not including railroads and steamboats and so on and so forth, we walked about 4,000 miles during that 4 years. By the way, when I was down in here in Georgia, there's Georgia, that's about the time my first enlistment ran out. And they said if I would enlist after 3 years, that they would give me a federal bonus, a state bonus, and a county bonus, and they would give me special status. I got to wear a stripe, that showed I was a veteran. And they would give me a 1-month furlough so I could go home for a month, no matter where I was at, no matter what was going on. Well, I didn't tell them, but about the time we got down here, I knew what was left back home. And I didn't trust any of those yo-yos that were still back home.
Yeah.
All right. Anybody, I mean, we pretty much had picked out here in Iowa about the cream of the crop. Anything was left, who knows what it would have been. Well, I didn't spend 3 years out there slogging around to have a bunch of hot shots give the whole thing away as soon as I leave. So I probably would have re-enlisted. By that time, my wife had left me and all sorts of things, so I had nothing to go back for anyway. But yeah, they gave me $600 total. That's better than a year's salary, and I thought that was all right. And the stripes and so on and so forth. But from there, from Washington, they take us over to Louisville, and they got to have time to get rid of us, is what it amounts to. They kept a few of the Iowa regiments just in case they were encountering guerrillas and so on and so forth. But for the most part, there wasn't a lot of that going on. They had, you know, that 4 years, them getting whooped, coming back to a whole lot of nothing. I wouldn't have wanted to have been some of those people down in Mississippi and Georgia. I would not have been. They came back to a whole load of nothing. Which I guess, from my standpoint, I guess you'd reap what you sow. But from there, it took about 3-4 weeks. So they mustered us out. I bought my weapon, my Enfield, for $6, and they didn't want my uniform and stuff back. So that's what I got. I went on a steamboat down the Ohio, got up to Sioux City. That's where I got off, and that's how I ended up here. There was some, they said there was some cheap land up there, so I wanted to see what that was all about. So then I came down here. Anyway, that's where I had been. That's what I've been doing. Is there any questions about your geography lesson?
Where did Iowans fight Texans at?
Where did Iowans fight Texans?
Yeah, what battle was between Iowa and Texas?
There was a lot of, there wasn't much going on in Texas. Most of the Texas troops had gone east.
So I asked that. I have a Leach revolver from 8600, Georgia.
Mhm.
It's on its butt. It's the 2nd Texas Volunteers, and it was given to an old person, another old person, who brought it home as a trophy of war. So I wondered, where the hell did he get a second Texas Volunteer?
It could, you'd almost
to
have
kill
to trace
and
where
bring
that
back?
regiment was. But there were Texans all in through here. Lee loved Texans, because he said Texans fight.
Well, yeah, they did.
So Texans, for the most part, fought every place but in Texas.
Okay.
So it could have been,
See, because it's a real witch to historically trace.
yeah, it could have been anywhere in there.
Okay.
You had them all over the
Thank
place.
you.
Okay. Any other questions about where I'd been? Yes, sir.
There's a local historian passed away, talked about how the Civil War influenced and spread an Eastern game called baseball.
Oh,
To the west.
baseball.
Did you ever have a Sunday afternoon?
Oh, yeah, I'll tell you. There was, I mean, you did anything. You know, my mother reads Harper's. Okay. And so she reads about all the battles and assumes you're in all of them. If I would have been in 1 out of 8, I'd be dead. You know, and then you see the pictures, you know, it looks like you're like that far apart. No, close range with that weapon was about 150 yards. Okay, but it doesn't look good in the picture if it looks like there's just a whole bunch of little ants out there someplace. Okay. Yeah, baseball, I mean, louse races. Have you done a louse race? No? Well, you know you had them, so. Gambling supposedly was forbidden. Well, it all depends who your officer was and blah, blah, blah. Okay. So there was some of that. Well, I was too tight to gamble, to tell you honest to God truth. That I wasn't very lucky anyway. So I had to do some more mundane stuff. I mean, you read, you play checkers, and you play baseball, that Eastern game. And yeah, anything to while away the time is what it amounts to. Did you ever do a louse race? No? Okay. You heat up like a skillet, and everybody picks their favorite, and you start them in the middle, and the first one that makes it to the outside wins the prize. Okay? So, yeah, just a different kind of gambling. Yeah, when I first got lice, it just, it made me crazy. But then you find out everybody's got lice. Somebody said once something about fleas. You said, oh my God, dogs got fleas. I've got lice at least. Yeah, I mean, it all depends where I was at. I mean, you kind of get used to doing this after a while. Because you just can't dive into a creek and try to drown them all, because then you got to walk around with 2 layers of wet wool on for the rest of your life. That ain't going to work. What you might do though is, aside from nitpicking, all right, while you're picking out the lice and so on and so forth, or you'd get around like a fire and you just take off your coat or whatever and kind of toast them. You can hear them pop. If nothing else, once you did that on one side, at least they'd have to have a day's march to get around to the other side of it. But yeah, anything to keep busy, I'll tell you. In the wintertime, normally you'd live in a tent, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But if the few times we were actually in a camp, because usually you didn't do a lot of fighting in the hard winter time. The roads were too bad and that sort of stuff. So you built something called she-banks. If you were anywhere near a woods, instead of having a tent, you would build up the sides on both sides. So you made kind of the base of a log cabin, then you put a tent over top of it. So you'd have 5, 6 guys living in one of those. Are you a baseball fan?
Well, that was asked for Ron Chamberlain, those that knew.
Yeah.
He was a local county historian since passed.
You play the Connecticut version, or?
Ron's not around to answer all those questions.
All right, okay. All right.
But thanks for your comment.
The Connecticut version. Yeah. When I've got more time, I'll tell you how baseball works, but some of you, I'm assuming, you play around here, don't you? Or do you? No? It'll get here sooner or later. It'll be all right. Was there a question over here someplace?
I was just going to ask if you'd ever been injured.
No. I've been sick a number of times. No, I was very fortunate. I've had bullet holes in various places, but not in me. I've been nicked a few times, but nothing that ever knocked me down. I can't imagine that. You'd get hit. Not that I've ever done it, but I've stood next to people who have. What you hear is something like that. All right, that's somebody getting hit. Just made a thud. Because these are real slow, heavy bullets. So if they hit you here, as an example, they don't bounce off. They just keep right on going. If they were faster, yeah, they bounce off. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to check. If that bone's shattered, your arm's gone.
Yeah.
It's either you're going to die, take your choice. Sound like bumblebees. Bzz, bzz, bzz. The artillery sounds like it has kind of a roar as it comes by. It all depends what they're shooting at you. By the way, just as a sidebar there, artillery. Ma thought that's all they shot was big round things. So if they shoot you like they put a hole this size through you, no. That was long range stuff. The only time they're going to shoot round shot, solid shot, is if they're trying to knock something out a long ways away. When you got closer, you get within 600 yards, 700 yards, something like that. They'd start shooting something that looked like this, or look like that. Those are going to explode, and those shot are going to come flying out all over the place. I don't know if you can see that back there in the cheap seats. These are just 2 different kinds of cannons these are shooting out of. Yeah, they call this grape shot. It's that size. You put a couple of dozen in there and they'll cut a path. A round shot, The idea was it was either gonna go right through you, through the ranks, or it was gonna bounce. Well, that worked okay as long as you're on hard ground, but this was much, much nastier.
So what kind of medical services did you have after you got shot with one of those?
They called them sawbones for a reason.
Yeah.
If you got hit, you're gonna be, okay, trying to compose my thoughts. A triage station is going to be about a half a mile behind the line. And they would never get any closer than that, because if they're overrun, they're captured, they're done. All right? Plus, nobody in the right mind, if you've got a heated battle going on, nobody in the right mind is going to go out and try to pick people up. You keep in mind, I was out there with 100 guys who came from my town. So we all knew each other. All right, you'd make pacts, you know, if something happened to me, you're going to tell Mom, right? Yep. And if I don't come back that night, you're going to come looking for me, right? Because we normally won, so we were able to do that. But they would take you back to a station, a medical, a barn, whatever they had. Usually it was somebody's barn. And there'd be all sorts of surgeons in there. They'd divide you up into 3 groups. So there's the guys who had superficial wounds. Most of those guys probably didn't necessarily need to be there, but it sounded like a pretty good idea at the time. And then on the far side, you've got the guys who are gut shot or head shot. And they're numbers up. There's not much they can do. And then there's the group in the middle, where you're hit someplace that isn't soft tissue. First thing they're going to do is check to see where you've been hit. So if you're hit here, they're going to check to see if that bone shattered. If that bone shattered, you're just next in line to get your arm taken off at about here. And they were really good at that. I mean, it was amazing how many people actually survived that. First time I saw one of those, I went, oh God, ain't gonna happen. But they knew just pretty much how to cauterize those veins and arteries and that sort of thing. You know, the guys on the other end, gut shot, head shot, they're going to give them whatever they can, usually laudanum, some sort of opiate, and they're just going to keep them comfortable until they finally fall over. I mean, that's the best that's going to happen.
Dysentery and anything like that?
Oh, you're talking about a whole different deal. Dysentery. Oh, yeah.
Foot rot?
The Tennessee trots, yeah. Yes. I had a much better chance of dying of something other than a bullet or a cannon or...
So what did they give you for that? I mean,
something called blue mass.
Oh, I mean, they didn't have a pistol.
If they had it, they probably would have used it, I guess. I don't know. They'd probably give you about anything. They carried all sorts of stuff. Blue mass is mercury and like clay.
Oh.
It's like a ball. What it does is gum you up.
I bet.
All right, because that's the idea. Does everybody know what dysentery is? The Tennessee trots. Yeah, okay, you get the idea. All right. Yeah, and that everybody gets that at some point in time. You know, in various stages. You got typhus. You got.
So you were in swamps. So then, did you get? Oh shoot! What are those things?
Malaria was another big one.
Leeches, probably.
Yeah, there we go.
Oh, leeches?
Leeches.
No.
No.
Well, I'm
Well, I guess with your uniform.
I'm assuming they had them, but I never had any applied to me. The way I understand it, that was like old medicine.
Oh, okay.
Because they used to believe... See,
No, I meant when you went through the swamps, did you get any on you?
Oh, did I get any on? Oh, I got all sorts of stuff on me. If they hadn't built a bridge someplace, you were wading through
Right.
a swamp. Oh, I mean, copperheads.
Yeah.
Of course, the only nice thing is I'm down there with 15,000, 20,000 of my friends. So unless I'm leading the parade, anything with a brain is out of the way. They're leaving, yeah. Yeah, the leeches, yeah, they didn't care one way or another. But They beat lice, I'll tell you. They'd come right off, it's not a problem. Lice, yeah, they tend to hide, you don't know where they're gonna end up. Is there anything else you want to know about my personal life? Yes, ma'am.
When soldiers were injured, were they sent back home, left in the town that they were injured in?
All right, hold on, start all over again.
When soldiers were injured, were they sent back home, left in the town that they were injured in, or brought along?
Okay, she's asking if you were injured, like if you were shot?
Like
Okay.
injured?
As opposed, okay. Yeah, or broke your leg, or, okay.
Yeah.
They would take you back, it all depends where it happened. If it was during a battle, they would take you back about a half a mile, do quick work. And then generally when it was over, and usually we were on the winning side, so then you'd go back to another hospital, farther back. A number of our guys, because they were from Iowa, ended up in Keokuk. There was a big hospital complex there. East Coast, there were the closest, it all depends where the closest one was. And you're going to recuperate. But in a lot of cases, they'd send you home. They had no way to do things. I mean, unless, if you were ambulatory, they could send you home.
How did they send you home? Did they send you home with like people that were also going home with you with like a guide, or they just give you a map and go, good luck?
They just go, hey, it's that way.
Oh, right, okay.
You just kind of ask as you go along. Well, there was, if you weren't in towards the front, they had by that time rebuilt the railroads. When you're moving forward, you're tearing up railroads, or they're tearing up railroads. Once you're established, then that's how we get our supplies. So they built those railroads back as quick as what they could. So you'd get back either railroad, steamboat, stagecoach. That's how I got here, because there's nothing that way. And Iowa City is the closest railhead from here. So yeah, however you got there, that's how you got there. If you could get yourself back to recover, like if you had some sort of a wound, you lost an arm or whatever, they would send you, either discharge you, period, or they would say, okay, you recuperate, and then we're going to bring you back. So it's kind of like the honor system is what it amounts to. But yeah, there's an outfit called the Invalid Corps. So that was composed of people who couldn't fight. They had at one point in time, but the government figured out the South was a lot bigger place than what anybody imagined. So if you're, for instance, we've taken over Memphis as an example, you got to leave somebody behind, otherwise they come right back. So they started something called, started off as the Invalid Corps. Well, that was a kind of a terrible term. They dressed you in sky blue. So it just wasn't very macho. So they changed that to the Veteran Reserve. So you could come back and you would do garrison duty, so able-bodied guys could then go forward. Is that what you asked me, or did I get off on a tangent?
It's kind of, it was on the same track.
Kind of what you asked?
Was that, you
That's
answered
pretty
what I
close for me.
asked. Yeah.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
So how many Iowans died in the Civil War?
13,000.
13,000, so not too bad, I guess.
Most of those died of disease.
That's what I was gonna say.
Yeah. Our regiment, you kind of replenish. So altogether, you started off with 1,000 men, but you hardly ever had 1,000 men from there on in because of,
Right.
measles, mumps, typhoid, typhus, dysentery, I mean, you name it, pneumonia, all sorts of diseases you could catch easily. So we had altogether 1,600 and some, off and on. Never that many at one time, because they'd send people back home and they would recruit. And then they would show up there. Then you'd lose some. Surprisingly enough, as far as actual people getting killed in battle, the 4th Iowa, which is my regiment, out of 1,600 total, we only lost like 95 actually killed on a battlefield. But there were 700 who went home for a variety of reasons. Either they were wounded and couldn't continue, or disease, or a variety of things. So you always got kind of a fluid group.
Prisoners of war then?
I'm sorry?
Prisoners of war, like how many of the Iowans got captured?
That I don't know. I'm going to step out of character. But we can find out real quick on that data. Okay? See, I'm back now. I don't know if she knows how to do that or not, but I do.
Well, speaking of the ones that didn't, you know, like the head wounds and whatever, so they passed away, so what, did you just put tags on them and put them on a, how did they?
It all depends where you were. Okay, we had embalmers that followed us.
Oh, really?
That was a new thing. Yeah, I mean, you could buy embalming insurance or whatever. It all, like when we were headed towards Atlanta, I mean, they kept pretty good records. So there was a thriving business after the war of people coming back to retrieve their dead. And by every battlefield, there's always a cemetery there, mainly full of people who died or whatever in that battle. Because if you ended up in a hospital, you had about a 70% survival rate. So they're going to die there. Well, it was important that you have a proper send-off. So if you died away from home, there was a lot of angst. When you died at home, you were laid out for 3-4 days. Everybody would show up. It was a real grieving time. When you're killed someplace else, in a lot of cases, it was important that they get whatever's left of that individual back. So we took fairly good care of our dead. And you could identify in most cases. Now, if you were killed in a battle or something like that and it had to be a hasty burial someplace, yeah. Right now, that Dorothea Dix is out looking for bodies. But yeah, we took pretty good care of our dead. Any other questions, quick? Yes, ma'am.
You ever do the same out of respect for the other side soldiers, or did they take care of their own?
No, we were as kind as what we could be, but we're not going to take as many pains with them as we would with our own. So we're going to take care of our own first. Plus, you keep in mind, everybody knew everybody. So like when they go back to recruit, they're going to go back and recruit in Afton. So chances are it's going to be somebody at least from that county. So everybody back home would know pretty much where that individual was, either where they were buried or what hospital they're in or whatever. That was a big deal. If one of your comrades, something happened to them, they didn't show up after a skirmish or a battle, you went looking for them as best you could, as they'd let you. But no, you did the best you could. But just the best you could.
In the books you wrote, do you have one just on the different battles the Iowa folks went through? I see you got books on the Civil War. Did you do a book just for where the Iowa boys went?
I did, but it's not there.
Okay. Fair enough.
It's kind of a work in progress, that it's a real slow progress.
Okay. Well, you said you covered many, many battle sites, so I was just curious. Should be a
Iowans,
should be a pretty good sized book.
we Iowans were all over that map.
Yeah.
In fact, there was even some in Virginia. There was one outfit, it was a cavalry outfit, and they wouldn't take them in Iowa. So they enlisted in a Pennsylvania outfit, and they fought at Gettysburg. 100 of them went east. They just kept going until they found somebody to take them. Anyway, okay. What kind of time are we talking about?
Yeah, I think we'll say thank you everybody for coming. If you have any more questions for OJ, he's welcome to answer and stay and continue chatting with him. Otherwise, if you have somewhere you need to be, you're welcome to About, so.
What was the weight?
12 pounds.
12?
12 pounds. Yeah, one of the things I did get to was, like if I were out in the field, you'd have a haversack, probably about 40 pounds. This would be everything I'd need. That's kind of like a woman's purse. Okay, so like right now I'd have hardtack in there, I'd have jerky, I'd have plate, I'd have a harmonica, I'd have anything I need. Coffee for sure. If we didn't have coffee, it's mutiny time. That's all there is to it. These guys, if you had a 15-minute stop, they could make a fire and they'd have coffee going. About that quick. Yeah.
Just one last one. Wasn't there more casualties in the Civil War, including deaths, than any other American history war?
Say it again.
Wasn't there more casualties from the Civil War than any other war in American
Yeah.
history?
The official total for years and years and years and years was right around 660,000. Okay, now they're saying, oh no, there was more than that. Now they're guessing. Now I don't know where they're getting their data, but that's been just the last 2-3 years. When the research, it says, oh no, there was closer to 700,000 casualties.
I was just curious if anybody in this has an Iowa Civil War in this crowd. Do we know anybody like you? Our neighbors or friends or relatives? Because
You mean-
I have a lot of Civil War vets.
Just so they won't ruin it.
Yeah.
Oh, reenactors?
No, what I'm asking is, any of us seated here have any person that was from Iowa during the Civil War?
If you're interested, Elena's got that full database.
Okay.
If you want to shoot the last name, she can
Oh,
find
no,
it.
I have a lot of them, but none of them are in Iowa.
What you can also do with this database is I can tell you what soldiers came from Harlan
Oh, yeah.
or from the county
This lady here.
and what happened to them.
It's my great-great-grandfather did, 24th Regiment, and I did visit Vicksburg Military Park. And we were just,
Good time at Vicksburg.
oh man.
If you like
It was
lice
really, yeah, it was very interesting how the berm would be about as tall as this. And they'd have a, whatever that gun is behind it, you know. My husband squatted down behind, I could see him clear as day, you know. No protection at all. But he was mustered, well, he was hurt at Black River Bridge.
Okay.
And there, of course, no x-ray, they couldn't figure out where the bullet was, so he lived 3 years with it. But he was mustered out at Harrisburg, Texas.
That is
Was he
weird.
a prisoner?
No, I don't believe so.
And he was with what regiment?
24th?
He might have been.
No, I'm sorry. No, 23rd.
Oh, okay.
23rd Regiment.
The 24th ended up getting captured down in Louisiana, and they spent
Oh,
the
no, he wasn't.
rest of the war in Texas.
But I got all his records, like, you know, month by month, you know, and he was absent or when he
You've
was.
got the muster
He'd
roll?
been hurt,
Mustard,
yeah, yeah.
Who'd you have to attack to get that?
Oh, you can get those. I have.
Yeah.
Not one like that.
Oh, like,
Well,
That's
it's
the real deal, it
original,
looks like.
it's,
yeah, I have those.
Yeah, General Services Administration, National Archives.
Yeah, I have those.
Yeah, now, just because we're not going to be together, I can either give you my email address or Liz has it. So if you come up with questions or you want to know about an ancestor from Iowa, I can do that via email anytime you
And we
want.
have business cards up here too. We'll just, if you want a card with contact information.
Well, yeah, I have a relative, his wife is buried in Gunnison, Iowa, and it's my grandfather, but I couldn't figure out why he wasn't buried there. Well, he was actually in the Civil War, and so he's buried in Wisconsin, because that's where he was from. So he's buried in the Wisconsin National Cemetery up there.
A fair amount of Civil War veterans end up in Iowa, because a number of Iowans end up going farther west. Because during the war, they opened up Nebraska. So some of these guys,
Yeah, he's from Wisconsin.
well,
He ended up-
farmland does this. Okay, so then back then they just go, oh, hell with it. and they just move on to the next one.
Exactly.
But he chose to be buried back up there, so his wife's buried in Iowa, and he was back up in the Civil War, or not the Civil War Cemetery, but, yeah, in the National Cemetery.
You've done a very nice job. Thank you very much for doing this.
Yes.
Okay. Yes, sir.
I'll give you a chance to wrap this up. You've done a wonderful job, I appreciate that. Have you ever done a joint session where a reenactor, a storyteller from the South,
Yeah.
have you shared that experience?
I did one of these. See, I've been at this for a long time. And I used to work for the area education agency. So I also used to do not necessarily this kind of a talk, but other talk, business talks. Well, for some reason or other, I was in New Orleans. And they wanted me to do one of these. And as it turns, one of the film salesmen, it was a she, all of a sudden jumps up. Her ancestors' plantation had been burnt during the Civil War. So we're going back and forth. I remember doing one of these, every once in a while somebody will pop up, and I encourage that. I had one lady in a tumwa wanted to know about my sex life. And I said, well, I'm sorry, they would never have done that. She says, well, would you tell your father? I suppose I would. She says, well, I'm your mother, so tell me about it. Yeah, every once in a while, or like I'll be talking in front of a group and there'll be a reenactor in there. Well, sometimes they want to play. Sometimes, for some reason, I make them feel bad. That, by God, I know as much as, so they start asking you questions like, well, so what color was Grover Cleveland's shoelaces at the Battle of, and you go, I don't know, I'm just a private, what the hell do I know? Yeah, no, I encourage that stuff, and I really appreciate you guys playing along with me while I was doing this. It makes my life a whole lot more fun when we do that. And there's a number of other things I could have gotten into. I mean, I asked how long this is supposed to go. I could go for a long time. We just kind of scratched the surface on this. But maybe someday I'll come back and we'll continue on where I left.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, if you got any other questions, she's ready to get out of here.
Go ahead and take our tables if you can have some.
Feel free to avail yourself of any of the stuff.